So John, would you come up, join Sabine? We have some moments for questions. I thought those were fascinating presentations. I was particularly struck by the fact that the good news is we're not rational men on many dimensions. But the bad news is we're not completely rational men, and so there's some good news and bad news in this. So questions and comments for our speakers.
David? Well, depending on what
I'm struck by this. The second half of what you said has a lot to do with the personal and the local. And I just wonder, I mean, I know there's tons of work that demonstrates that, and yet so many of the things we're talking about are global. And it just makes me wonder if perhaps that doesn't suggest that that for the sort of global issues, maybe trying to change people's behavior is not as good as just setting up institutional constraints so that certain things are possible. But then the community can enforce because you know, the grandmother in Alaska will move someone for 5 minutes and then won't, right? But the neighbor will always be affected. And so I just wonder if that sort of is a guide in terms of what kinds of behavior you try to change as opposed to what kinds you just try to legislate.
Yes, I mean, yeah, going from this legislation, that's
Sabine.
Going from this personal and localized approach to some form of legislation, yes, that is difficult. But if we can get the legislators to understand that our actions here have an influence on globally, then there may be more of an there's this connectedness with the other members in the room when international governments get together, and people will be reminded, I have heard this story, or they come to the meeting because they have already heard the story. So I think it can lead to the engagement. And I think if we, and it's not enough to just tell me one story from a village chief in Alaska. I also need to hear the story from Bangladesh, and I need to hear the story from many places in order to create a map that has all these dots on it that will then show me I cannot ignore all these dots on the map that have a story attached to it. So I think getting legislators to realize that interconnectedness, I think, would be one way to do it.
Well, what I'm just trying to suggest is that maybe that's not, the map of the whole world doesn't seem from your work to be a motivator for actual behavior change. Right?
I think if you zoom in, and then you zoom out again. I think you give this opportunity to zoom in, but then take a step back and how am I connected to that place? And it also, I think it shows that you, in your place in the world, are also only this tiny dot. That's, I think, like when there's a snowstorm in DC, how can there be climate change? Like, no, it really doesn't matter if there's a snowstorm in DC, even though you think it's the biggest thing in your world. So, like, I think it gives you that perspective of you on the map and others on the map, and that you have, like, you share equal parts. And
John, do you want to talk to this issue of local versus global?
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, a lot of the things that Sabine mentioned also, a lot of these basic concepts that Sabine mentioned apply to other groups around the world. Again, in this village in Pakistan, it was the same sort of thing. I mean, they responded to the same broad kinds of incentives that we respond to. And I mean, they're concerned about their local lives also. We had some sort of question, we had a questionnaire, and the question was something like, what would you like, how do you envision your life? What would you want to be? And you know, they don't want to move to Manhattan and be stockbrokers. I mean, they're quite happy with the life the way it was, the way they've lived over decades. It's just that now it's being adversely impacted. There are more conflicts between local groups and so on. But actually, the World Wildlife Fund in Pakistan is actually applying a lot of these ideas to that, you know, very illiterate peasant fishing group. So yeah, that's something.
The good news is, again, you pointed to some really interesting concrete examples of, like, village communication is better than county communication. The bad news is that on the economic side, there are huge additional complexities that you haven't really dealt with. I know you can in 20 minutes, but one is what we called in a 2007 series in the Times, the climate divide, Overall,
Yeah.
the IPCC projection for the United States, for North America, is an increase in agricultural production through
Yeah.
2050.
Right.
And then theoretically
Yeah.
everyone goes to hell.
Right.
So how do you, and it's there, you pointed to the paleoclimate curve as if this is some straight line
Yeah, I know the regional
thing.
differences.
So
Yeah.
the climate divide is essentially that the wealthy, technologically enabled countries that have built their economies around fossil fuels and added to this
Yeah.
greenhouse burden
Yeah.
are insulating themselves already from climate risk
Yeah.
with various things. And so we're
Yeah.
not feeling the pressure that they might be feeling in Pakistan.
Yeah, if you look at the sort of the geopolitical consequences, I mean, like people now are working on carbon capture from the atmosphere, actually reducing CO2 levels. But, you know, in a few years, suppose that in Siberia becomes an agricultural, wonderland. So Russia's going to be prospering. Are they going to sit by, okay, we're going to go back to where we were before? I mean, if you start talking about that, there's all kinds of just, seemingly insurmountable debates. I mean, we can't get together now on reducing CO2. When the situation changes, there are going to be winners and losers, how the winner's going to react and so on. So,
Just one
Yeah.
additional thought on icons, like showing a mountain glacier going in one direction. There have been a number of icons that have proved counterproductive in the long run. Kilimanjaro was a classic case where we don't really understand the forces leading to reduction in ice there, and it was hyped as, now it's an icon for the skeptics. Now they go, see, the published science says this isn't what it looks like, so you have to be incredibly careful about picking imagery.
I think to that point, we can't overuse the same icon over and over again. I think that has happened to the polar bear. I'm like, everybody's like, oh my God, another polar bear. But if we vary the image, and that's something that we're starting to look into, like actually engaging with artists and use their interpretations and new interpretations of this imagery to keep it fresh and to keep people engaged. And I should probably give credit to the photograph that was taken of the Alaskan village chief. Sabanka Banerjee has done some amazing work in capturing like polar bears, and even like the person who's like most numb to seeing another polar bear is like, oh my God, and this is because you look eye to eye with this polar bear. So I think that's important, like picking the icons and keeping them varied and fresh.